Here is Sailor Kobe number 30 Ijinkan Mint. I know I butchered that. A green ink. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion on this ink.
The paper I'm using here is a Maruman Mnemosyne Notebook.
As a green, I find this almost entirely unusable. It's far too light, and I'm even having trouble reading it from my notes here. To say it's unpleasant is an understatement. I can say that what you're seeing now is the darkest, most readable version that you'll see in this entire review.
All of the writing samples are done with a Retro 51 P51 with a fine nib, a Retro 51 Corsair with a medium nib, a Retro 51 Lincoln with a 1.1 stub.
The pen for today is a Noodler's Neponset.
Now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how I got there with the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
Looking at the extra fine nib, in person, I don't know, I can't see it on the camera, so I'm hoping it comes through on camera. It's very light, it's kind of there. The thing is, this as a color needs the right person. I am not the right person. It's just so light. It doesn't feather and it doesn't spread. It's on Clairfontaine paper. Technically, it does shade some, which lets us know that there is some writing when we see those darker areas. Can you tell I didn't enjoy it? Looking at the medium nib, it is unfortunately the same tone as it was with the extra fine. It still doesn't feather, still doesn't spread. The thicker lines did make the shading show up a little bit more, making it ever so slightly easier to read, thankfully, since it's hard otherwise. Looking at the stub nib, it is a bit darker than it was with the extra fine or the medium, thankfully. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread, it does shade. It is rather readable on the page, much more than the shading, which looks good. I think from this nib is pretty darn nice. It's usable here. Not great usable, but usable for a second tone on the page if you're adding something into your notes that you don't want to be distracting from the original notes. Looking at the back of the page, I'd be surprised if this managed to have any show through. It doesn't ghost at all. It doesn't bleed. I'd have been surprised by it, not just because it's Clairfontaine, but this ink is just so light.
Like most inks, this one comes in a bottle. This is how the Pilot Custom 823 fits. And here is the Pelican M1000. Here is the ink level when you can no longer fill a Lamy Safari. There is approximately 7 milliliters of ink left. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is immediately put into water for 10 to 15 seconds. The one on the right, marked with a D, is let dry for 10 minutes before putting into water. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. The highlighter is on the top left. Pen flush is on the top right, 1/3 bleach solution is on the bottom left, and water is on the bottom right. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables.
Here is Blackstone Daintree Green. Here is Califolio Teodora. Here is Caran d'Ache Delicate Green. Here is Colorverse Sea of Tranquility.
While it's nice to see ink in the same color family, I prefer to see ink to complement the color on the page.
Here is Monteverde Topaz. Here is Robert Oster Summer Storm. Here is Birmingham Pen Company Allegheny Arsenal Gunpowder Black. Here is Roeder & Klinger Alt Bordeaux.
The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper.
Looking at the extra fine nib, it is a little bit darker than it was on the Clairfontaine. As light as it is, I can see that it's feathering and I can see that it spreads, which I think makes it a little easier to see. I guess that's a good thing if you were using this on the 20-pound toilet paper, which is what I used it on quite a bit at work because I couldn't use it on good paper if I wanted to read what I was writing. Looking at the medium nib, it is the same tone as it was with the extra fine, a little bit darker than on the Clairfontaine. Yes, it feathers. Yes, it spreads. Yes, it has some shading. It's usable here. Despite the feathering and the spread, it's usable because you can actually see what's there. So I'm giving this a positive on this part. Looking at the stub nib, it is the same tone as it was with the medium and the extra fine on this paper. A little bit lighter than it was on the Clairfontaine, though it is usable if you had to. Sure, it feathers. Sure, it spreads. It's still on copy paper. Looking at the back of the page, you can still see that this ink did get deep into the page, but luckily it's so light that if you were using this on both sides, you could probably get away with it, because it's horrible, but nothing bled through touching the page underneath, so I guess it's got that going for it.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
The paper I'm using here is yellow Rhodia paper.
I want to immediately point out that what you're seeing on the yellow Rhodia paper here is pretty readable. It's not too bad, but it's also coming from a gusher of a pen. So to cut to the chase and not even bother talking about those other pens, because let's be honest, that's unusable. The only thing you can use this for, it needs a very wet pen just to have that usable tone. Now that's for me. Again, I recognize that for someone, this is the perfect ink, and for them, I'm very happy. For me, I never want to use it again.
I hope you got something out of this video, and thanks for watching. I want to let you know that the best way you can support this or any channel is to let retailers know where you heard of something if you go to buy.